Welcome to Season 3 of the Soualichi Stories, presented by the Forsythe Foundation and funded by Fonds voor Cultuur, Partitipatie. The Soualichi Story series includes tales of our island's beloved legends, history, and folklore as told by exceptional storytellers. Forsythe Foundation is honored to share these stories as it brings people together and bridges the gap between generations. These stories remind us of our culture, our heritage, our one island. Through these stories, we hope you feel more connected as we thrive to keep the storytelling alive. Please enjoy this next Soualichi story and all other stories within this series, and let us know if there are any other particular stories you would like to hear in the future. Enjoy!
When I was about 7 years old, growing up in Aruba in the late 1950s, after baking her Johnny cakes on what she called a stone, a flat iron griddle, on the stove burner, my mom would sit with us children outside on moonlight nights and tell us Jumbie stories. My favorite one was a story she titled, Put Me Back Where You Take Me From. It was about a lady on St. Martin. All my mom's Jumbie stories took place on St. Martin, or her native Anguilla, who, on her way home one night, when the moonlight was as bright as day, found a little abandoned kitten under a tamarind tree. The tamarind tree was a common denominator in all of my mom's Jumbie stories. The kitten was a cuddly little thing which ran toward her, rubbing its head against her leg, meowing pitifully, meow, begging to be picked up. So, overcome with pity, the kind-hearted lady picked up the young cat and took it with her. Being a widow who had lost her husband a year ago, she felt that her newfound pet would be a little companion and a source of consolation during the lonely evenings when she missed her dear departed husband, Rufus. Also, he would be able to keep those ferocious rats away which had gotten into her house and into the bag where she kept her cornmeal. When she arrived at the tiny limestone and wattle house, she opened the door of her little kitchen and placed her bag and the kitten on the floor. As she stepped into the kitchen, she looked in wonderment at how the moonlight had brightened the room. Kitty started to meow, and while speaking softly and reassuringly, she poured him a saucer of milk from the bottle on the shelf. She took a box of matches from her cupboard, lit her 2 kerosene lamps, put one on the kitchen table and the other on a small stand next to her lodgings. Lodgings were a pile of old clothes where she slept. She then lit her small 1-burner kerosene stove. She sighed as she remembered how happy she was when Rufus's brother in Curacao had sent them this stove. She would no longer have to go outside at night to catch fire to heat water for their tea. A tear rolled down her face as she thought about how much she missed her Rufus. The kitten, as though sensing her sadness, rubbed his head comfortingly against her leg and reminded her of his presence. Tired after a long day working her little ground where she had planted pigeon peas, sweet potatoes, okra, and eggplant, she sat down in her rocking chair and decided to rest for a few minutes. She picked up the kitten, put him on her lap, and petted him. After a while, she got up and pulled out a basket next to the stove, lined the basket with an old towel, and made a little bed for Kitten to sleep. She went outside her door and dipped rainwater from a barrel, filled a bucket, and took her bath. On her way inside, she picked a few soursop, bush leaves, and proceeded to make some tea. Unwrapping the piece of cassava bread with guava jelly that she had brought back home, she tiredly sank down once more into her rocking chair and had her supper. Feeling sleepy, she decided to get ready for bed. Before lying down, however, she knelt and said her prayers, thanking the Lord for seeing her through this day and for bringing her little tomcat into her life. In no time, she was fast asleep, but a few hours later, she was awakened by a presence she sensed over her, and when she opened her eyes and quickly sat up to see what or who that could possibly be, she beheld a huge tomcat glaring down at her. She quickly squeezed her eyes shut, thinking that she was having a nightmare, but when she opened them again, he was still there, and she could see him clearly by the light of the moon. His huge green eyes seemed fluorescent and angry. Overcome with fear, she tried to get up and run, and that is when she heard this deep voice saying,
Put me back where you take me from.
She screamed, "Ah, ran outside. It stumbled over the roots of the kinip tree and almost fell, but she wouldn't stop running until she reached her cousin Casilda's house. Cassie! Oh, Cassie! She started to yell before she even reached the door. Oh, Lord, Cassie, open up fast for your cousin, Cassie, Cassie! Cassie sleepily appeared in her window saying, "What got you, girl? What do you this over the night?" "Let me in, Cassie, let me in!" she yelled. "The cat going kill me, the cat going kill me!" As Cassie opened the door to let her in, the noise woke her baby, who started to cry. Cassie's elder daughter, Melda, who now was also awake, picked the baby up and tried to soothe her. In the meantime, Gertrude had dropped down on a bench, breathless and trembling from fear and exhaustion. She tried her best to relate her story to Cassie, but she only managed to babble incoherently. Cassie, who could make no sense of Gertrude's gibberish, asked her daughter Melda to quickly fetch some sugar water for her cousin to calm her down. By this time, Cassie's partner Maurice appeared to see what the ruction was all about. He was disgruntled at having been disturbed from his sleep and shook his head in disbelief as he listened to Gertrude once more tell her story.
"You probably was dreaming, Gertrude," he said. "You had a nightmare. Go back home and rest yourself."
Gertrude now started to wail, "Lord, no, Maurice, will you please let me stay here till morning? I can't go back to my house. The tomcat going to kill me. Lord have mercy, he going to kill me. It wasn't no dream. I same as plain as I see you know. And I hear him say what he said." Gertrude started to tremble with fear at the thought of going back home.
"All right," Maurice said. "I'm going to walk you back home."
Thinking to himself,
"Poor Gertrude. She never been the same since Rufus died. Look like she gone crazy now."
Then looking outside at the moonlight night and remembering that zombies usually came out on these nights, he felt a shiver go down his spine. Suppose Gertrude was talking the truth. In addition, he had to pass under a tamarind tree to get to her house. Zombies always congregated under those trees, and he didn't want to show any sign of fear, for he was known in Cultuur to be fearless and bold.
But just to be sure, he thought, let me ask Cassie to go with me.
So he pulled Cassie aside and told her,
"I don't believe Gertrude's story. I think she had a nightmare, and she never been the same since Rufus died. I will walk her home, but you have to go with me because you know I don't see so good in the night."
Cassie, who herself was afraid of what they might encounter either on the way to or in Gertrude's house, said, "Not me, Maurice. I'm going to stay with the children."
"You hear what I say, Cassie?"
Maurice said sternly.
"You want me to go out here by myself and break my neck? I tell you, I don't see so good in the night."
"But Maurice," said Cassie, "moonlight bright like day, you're bound to see."
"Woman, you hear what I say?"
said Maurice, establishing his authority, afraid that Cassie might sense his fear and lose respect for him.
"You're going with me."
Cassie knew she had no alternative when Maurice talked in that tone of voice and went over to Melda and told her, "I'm going with your daddy. Take care of the barber."
"Oh no, Mommy!"
the 11-year-old shrieked.
"Then the tomcat don't come for me and the barber." "Ain't gonna tomcat out there, Melda,"
her daddy said.
"Your cousin had a nightmare."
Melda looked at the cousin, who was still trembling with fear at the prospect of going back home, and babbling,
"He going to get me. Lord have mercy. The tomcat going to get me."
"Mommy!" Melda cried.
"I won't go by cousin Rini till you come back."
"Law, if she go by cousin Rini by 4 in the morning, the whole of Cultuur going to know what happened," thought Cassie. Cousin Rini was known for the biggest Milarosa in Cultuur, but the child was so scared and she couldn't blame her, and she wouldn't feel at ease knowing that the children were at home. She looked at Maurice for his reaction. He shook his head disapprovingly, but Melda started to bawl and the baby joined in.
"Lord, I can't take this bawling no more. Let go,"
he said angrily. Cassie watched as Melda crossed over to cousin Rini's house. Carrying the baby in her arms, Rini had been awakened by the ruction and was peeping from behind a cherry tree in her yard, dying to know what was going on over there. She was only too happy to see Melda running over with the baby. She would get the whole story now. She couldn't wait. What a melee she would have to tell the neighbors in the morning. So Maurice grabbed his machete, picked up a kerosene lamp and some matches, and motioned to Cassie and Gertrude to follow him. He then remembered that he had to pass the tamarind tree, so he told Cassie and Gertrude while taking off his shirt,
"You turn your clothes inside out so the zombie don't follow me."
He put his shirt back on inside out, and the threesome set out in the night. Maurice in front and the two women a few steps behind. As Maurice approached Gertrude's dwelling, His steps slowed. He looked behind him to reassure himself that the women were still there and admonished them to hurry up. He waited until they caught up with him, a silent trio who had not said a word on the way for fear the tomcat would hear them. On arrival at Gertrude's door, Gertrude beat a hasty retreat, saying, "I'm going to the latrine, my belly hunting me." So only Cassie and Maurice were now left to go into the house. Maurice lit the kerosene lamp and gingerly entered after ensuring that his machete was in a state of readiness for the defense. Cassie's knees were buckling as they surveyed the room, trying to find anything suspicious. Cassie whispered to Maurice, "Ma, check the basket." Maurice walked over, tightened his grip on his machete, carefully peeked into the basket, and then proceeded to let out a hearty laugh. "Oh, I tell you!" he shouted triumphantly. "Come see!" Cassie carefully ventured over to take a peep. A little black and white kitten was peacefully sleeping in the basket. Cassie heaved a sigh of relief and she herself laughed.
I tell you, Gertrude here ain't no good,
said Maurice, trying hard not to show how relieved he was. "I'll go and get Gertrude," Cassie told him. She too had regained her composure and was her old self again. Arriving by the latrine door, she had to coax and beg Gertrude to get out by telling her that they only had seen a small kitten and that she must have dreamed the whole thing. Gertrude started to screech out of sheer frustration. "It wasn't a dream! Oh, you don't want to believe me! I don't want a cat in my house!" When they arrived at the house, Maurice was peering into the basket once again. Was it his imagination? Or had the cat gotten a little bigger? Gertrude cautiously entered her house and refused to look in the basket, even though he begged her to. She grabbed Maurice's arm, pleading, "Please, take him with you, and let him go under that tamarind tree. Please don't leave me here with that demon." Maurice agreed, and the threesome, as Gertrude didn't want to be left behind, headed out once more, this time to put the cat back where Gertrude did take him from. On the way, Maurice noticed that his cargo seemed to be getting heavier, and he peeked cautiously into the basket, and indeed, the animal seemed a little bigger.
"Nonsense,"
he said to himself.
"My eyes really playing tricks on me. Gertrude will get me going crazy just like she."
They arrived at the tamarind tree, and Maurice quickly put the basket down and marveled at how weightier it seemed to have gotten. Although he was curious, he didn't stop to investigate, and they then headed back to Maurice and Cassie's home as quickly as they could. Maurice got the urge to look back at where they had left the kitten, but as he was a man who read his Bible regularly, he remembered the scripture about Lot and decided not to do so. However, a few steps further, he couldn't resist the temptation to look back. And when he did, he beheld this huge tomcat sitting under the tamarind tree. His large green eyes seemed fluorescent and shone in the moonlight, and they were glaring at him. The hair rose on his head. He broke out in a cold sweat and he started to walk faster and told the women who were trying their best to keep up with him,
"I was so slow. I don't know why I beat all you women. How you women could always keep a man back."
In the meantime, he was saying a silent prayer to the Lord, begging him to get them home safely and not to punish him for looking back. Cousin Renee now had seen them coming from afar, and she was already in the front of their home with Melda and the baby. She was salivating at the prospect of hearing the juicy million they would have to tell her. She couldn't wait for them to arrive, so she started walking towards Maurice, who was panting hard like he had seen a ghost.
"Ma," she said, "what happened to you? Look like something frightened you. Look like you see Jumbie and Gertrude."
Now that Maurice had gotten home safely, he tried hard to regain his composure and to pull himself together. After all, he had a reputation to keep up, and he couldn't let Renee go around tomorrow telling the whole of St. Martin that he was afraid of zombies. He looked at Cousin Renee with a smirk, sucked his teeth, and said,
"What will frighten me? A little kitten in a basket, that's all we found."
Cousin Renee sucked her teeth disappointedly, caught her eye at Gertrude, who was quietly sobbing and looked downright miserable. Then Renee said goodnight and turned to go home. Cassie fed the baby, and they all went back to bed. Gertrude spent a week with Cassie and Maurice, and when she was convinced that no one had ever seen the big tomcat at night again, she moved back to her house. Maurice, only several years later, told Cassie what he had seen that night when he looked back at the cat under the tamarind tree. He never again walked under that tree alone at night after that fateful encounter. He got a cat phobia as bad as Gertrude's, and he would chase away every cat that dared to come into the yard, much to the dismay of Cassie and Melda, who now had to contend with an increasing rat population. Poor Gertrude never picked up anything that she found along the way ever again, even though it broke her heart to leave a 5 guilder bill she saw lying in the grass one night. And in those days, 5 guilders was a fortune. Melrosa really told her story the following morning to everyone who was willing to listen, and she told it. And as she told it, the story grew juicier and juicier. And Melda grew into a beautiful young woman who eventually got married and had 6 children of her own. On moonlight nights, when she baked her Johnny cakes on a stone on the little kerosene stove which she had inherited from her parents, she told her children Jumbie stories. And even though the stories sometimes made them afraid to sleep at night, the children loved all their mommy's Jumbie stories, but their favorite story, the one they begged for time and time again, the one they loved most of all, was the story of Cousin Gertrude and the tomcat who told her to put them back where she came from. And now, bend the story in.
We hope you enjoyed this inspiring Soualichi story, presented by the Forsythe Foundation and funded by Fonds voor Cultuur Partitipatie. We hope this story helped you to feel more connected to the island and to each other. More information on the story and schedule can be found on the Forsythe website and social media pages. We look forward to connecting with you again in our next Soualichi story.